The first mournful howl pierced the still night air, its haunting echo resonating through the narrow streets. I paused, skin prickling with unease as I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing but empty road and darkened windows behind me. Yet the woeful sound seemed to come from somewhere within the village itself. I hadn't intended to stop here. The remote hamlet was merely a speck on my map, a place to rest on my aimless travels. But as dusk fell and fog crept in, enshrouding the twisting mountain roads, I decided to stay the night rather than risk the hazardous journey onwards. The village appeared abruptly through the mist, a smattering of timber-framed cottages and cobbled lanes, relics from a bygone era nestled between the craggy foothills. An old wooden sign proclaimed it Haven's End, though the place seemed devoid of life. Many dwellings stood dark and shuttered, giving the unsettling impression of a ghost town suspended in time. I made my way to the only establishment still alight, a tavern named the Silver Stag, and took a modest room upstairs. The proprietor, a taciturn elderly gentleman, regarded me with wary eyes but kept his suspicions to himself. As night deepened, I lay awake listening to the inn's timbers creak and sigh, wondering at the odd stillness blanketing the village. Eventually, I drifted off into a fitful sleep, until that first baleful howl startled me awake well past midnight. Now I stood frozen, peering uselessly into the gloom. For an instant, I thought I glimpsed something, a pale shape fluttering at the edge of vision. But when I blinked, it vanished. I shuddered, suddenly conscious of how alone I was. Back in my room, I hardly slept, watching the window for any signs of movement. Yet nothing stirred in the moonlit square below. When I descended for breakfast the next morning, the tavern was empty. My footsteps echoed across dusty floorboards as I approached the bar. The proprietor was nowhere to be seen. I called out, but only silence answered. On the countertop sat a scrap of paper weighed down by a pewter tankard. Scrawled in an unsteady hand was a message. "Leave this place. Beware the witching hour." A chill crawled down my spine. For all the peculiarity I had witnessed since arriving, this was my first tangible warning. As I stood deliberating my next move, another mournful howl reverberated outside. A woman's scream followed, raising the hairs on my arms. I rushed out into the square. In the light of dawn, Haven's End remained cloaked in stillness. Nothing stirred except for a raven perched on the well, peering at me with an almost knowing gaze. The only remarkable thing was the hour itself. According to the clock tower opposite, it was already past 11. Impossible. I had risen just after sunrise. As I stood befuddled, the raven cawed and took flight. I watched it vanish over the rooftops. And that's when the spectral shapes appeared. They emerged slowly from the shadows between buildings. Wolves, translucent ones with shimmering fur and eyes that glowed silver blue. I stood frozen in awe and terror as at least a dozen gathered in the square, turning their gazes on me. Surely I was dreaming. But I felt no threat from them. Their demeanor seemed calm, almost beckoning. When I didn't move, one approached cautiously and butted its muzzle against my hand. I felt a peculiar cold tingling, but no solid mass. It gazed up at me with patient expectation, as real as any living creature. Heart-thudding, I let the ghostly wolf guide me down a winding lane toward the village outskirts. The rest of the pack followed, their footfalls silent. What reality had I stumbled into? The spectral procession led me to a forgotten cemetery nestled against a looming cliffside. Ancient headstones tilted beneath the shade of gnarled yew trees. The wolves fanned out among the graves, settling atop them like guardians. Each headstone, I now realized, bore the etched likeness of a wolf alongside human names and dates. Whose resting place is this? My voice sounded thin and reedy. The question felt absurd, but my eerie guides observed me steadily. A lone white wolf with eyes like pale moonstones approached and lowered its head. Behind it, the headstone bore the name Wolfram and a date over a century old. I drew a sharp breath, a sense of foreboding settling heavy in my heart. What tragedy had befallen this village and its spectral protectors? Chapter 2: Unraveling the Mystery. After my chilling encounter amid the forgotten graves, I returned to the Silver Stag, hoping to find answers. The tavern remained empty, dust motes swirling in shafts of sunlight. I scoured the premises but discovered no trace of life or explanation for the proprietor's disappearance. In his quarters, I found only an open door and abandoned possessions, as though he had simply stepped out and vanished. Uneasy, I ventured upstairs to search my room. But as I reached the landing, a guttural snarl brought me up short. The largest black wolf I had ever seen stood before my door, hackles raised, icy blue eyes burning. It stalked toward me, teeth bared, backing me toward the stairs. This was no phantom. Its monstrous form was terrifyingly corporeal, paws thudding against the floorboards. I cried out as I lost my footing, tumbling backward down the stairs in a painful heap. When I looked up again, the wolf was gone. Terror seized me. I had to escape this place before whatever sinister forces dwelled here claimed me too. As I fled for the door, something snagged my attention. Behind the counter stood a locked cabinet topped with candles and dog-eared books. Scrambling over, I smashed the glass and hastily grabbed a leather journal from within, along with a brass key tucked between its pages. It was the best hope I had of unraveling Haven's End's unsettling mysteries. Clutching the journal, I dashed outside into the empty village square, glancing wildly about for any sign of the wolf. The raven watched me intently from its perch atop the shuttered smithy. For now, I was alone. In the distance, the clock tower chimed noon, though the sun remained fixed at its late morning height. Time held no meaning here. Following some intuition, I circled behind the row of shops to a weed-choked path leading away from town. The trail brought me to a crumbling stone cottage, so covered in ivy it was nearly invisible against the craggy foothills. The brass key slid neatly into the lock, the door creaking open to reveal stacks of leather-bound books and odd artifacts, a secret archive. Here, I hoped to find some answers at last. Lighting candles to dispel the gloom, I settled down to read the proprietor's journal, making notes of anything significant. The cottage, I learned, belonged to the former village historian, chronicler of Haven's End's strange history. Much of what I read correlated with my own observations, the empty dwellings, the bewildering time distortions, all phenomena tied to an ancient curse. According to the journal, Haven's End suffered a horrific tragedy a century ago. A fire swept through the village, leaving many dead and the rest driven mad by grief. The village historians speculated that in their delirium, the survivors made a deal with sinister forces that allowed them to continue living with their ghostly loved ones, but only by remaining trapped in the same fatal day. A bargain that cursed them and their spectral protectors, the spirit wolves, to haunt Haven's End for eternity. I sat back, moved by pity for the poor souls caught in this perpetual purgatory. But the key discovery was a ritual the historian referenced, a means of communing with the spirit wolves to potentially break the curse. To perform it, however, one had to visit their spectral gathering grounds precisely at midnight. Perhaps I could succeed where the villagers had failed so long ago. I prepared feverishly as the hour approached, gathering ritual ingredients from the cottage and memorizing the invocations. Dusk fell, and I made my way back to the Silver Stag under the ghostly wolves' watchful gazes, their eyes flickering in the gloom. Tonight I would unravel the mystery of Haven's End or die trying. Chapter 3: Unleashing Darkness. As midnight neared, I stood within the abandoned cemetery where I had first encountered the spirit wolves, ritual items carefully arranged. Evergreens and flowering herbs encircled the weathered shrine I had constructed atop one of the older graves. Candles flickered amidst offerings of food and stones. I hoped to commune with the wolf spirits and free them from their curse. But channeling unknown entities and occult magic carried inherent risks, which I accepted. Any information I gleaned about the fateful bargain that condemned Haven's End could prove pivotal. Soon, mist crept between the graves, gathering into otherworldly shapes. The wolves materialized one by one, watchful and silent. Midnight struck, the prescribed moment, and I began my incantations, pleading for understanding and redemption. The specters sat attentive, and the air hummed with gathering power. Then disaster. A blast of icy wind extinguished my candles, plunging the ritual into darkness. Snarls erupted around me as the phantom beasts transformed, their benevolent might warped by my careless ritual. No longer ghostly, but demonic beasts with eyes of blazing coals and jaws that dripped spectral blood. The altar exploded in a burst of light, knocking me to the ground. Then the screaming started. Horrible, anguished screams from countless tormented souls. I clutched my ears in agony, the dead of Haven's End, unleashed by my failed ritual. Shadows swirled and congealed into gnarled humanoid shapes, their empty gazes boring into me. The spirit wolves howled savagely, apparitions no longer, but twisted manifestations of primal fury. I crawled away in horror at what I'd unleashed. The darkness pursued me all the way back to the village square. Behind me came shrieks, howls, sounds of shattering glass and splintering wood, the entrapped souls run amok. The silver stag blazed, flames devouring the timber frames as the night turned hellish. Not just a haunting now, but a reckoning. In the inferno's glare, I glimpsed the spectral shapes racing down streets, smashing through doors and shutters. The spirit wolves hunted in a frenzied pack, any benign remnants lost to bloodlust. What had I done? In trying to uplift a curse, I had unleashed forces beyond my control. Haven's End faced eradication by the very spirits tied to its existence, unless I could somehow quell the gathering tempest. Chapter 4: Battling the Unseen Evil. From the archives in the crumbling cottage, I unearthed rituals for dispelling violent entities, exorcism rites from Haven's End's occult past. But I feared binding or eliminating the cursed spirits might undo what was left of the village itself, erasing any hope of salvaging either. There had to be another way. In poring over the proprietor's journal, I noticed odd gaps and omissions, phrases that hinted at some administrative body overseeing the village and enforcing secrecy. If some cabal was charged with manipulating Haven's End's supernatural fate, perhaps its members possessed the knowledge to restore balance. I searched the burning village for signs of this mysterious order, but found only ravaged homes and empty streets. The awareness prickled that I was being watched, observed from the shadows by forces waiting to see if I would contain the damage I'd caused. They would offer no aid. I was an outsider condemned by my ignorance. Despairing, I stumbled into the Silver Stag's cellar, half collapsed and partially flooded. But there, floating in the stagnant water, lay a body, the tavern keeper. I dragged the poor soul out and attempted resuscitation, but it was too late. Fresh blood oozed from bite marks that could only have come from the monstrous spirit wolves. In his rigid hand, the proprietor clutched a strange medallion etched with arcane symbols. This had to be the symbol of the order overseeing Haven's End. Around his neck hung a leather satchel, within which I discovered a sheaf of parchment covered in glyphs and incantations, spells for binding evil entities. Forbidden knowledge that perhaps provided the key to reversing the destruction. For hours I studied the parchment, committing the rituals to memory. They seemed designed to draw in surrounding dark forces and seal them within a vessel, a living host, willing or unwilling. A dangerous gambit, but I was out of options. I could not allow the spirits to continue terrorizing the village or escape into the larger world. When the fires eventually burned down and an unholy silence blanketed the village, I prepared the binding ritual beneath the light of the blood moon, flanked by salt circles and artifact totems. If the cursed spirits would not listen to reason or redemption, I would face them myself and end this madness. I only hoped I could contain the darkness rather than being consumed by it. Chapter 5: Eternal Night. The dark ritual took every ounce of my strength. But as the first vengeful spirits materialized before me, snarling and screeching, I drew them into my pulsating artifacts and slew them one by one. Each time, the medallion around my neck burned hotter while the spirits' voices grew louder in my mind, howling, screaming with fury at their imprisonment. But I could not stop until Haven's End was pacified. Hordes of wraiths and demons came at my call, tearing through the swirling vortex I had opened between worlds. Soon the night was awash in my blood and theirs, and still they kept coming. I sensed the spirit wolves circling nearby, watching my struggle impassively. When dawn's light filtered over the mountains at last, my body trembled with exertion, but no spectral shapes remained. Utter silence filled Haven's End's ravaged streets. I had succeeded in my quest, though at grave personal cost. The bindings I had wrought now carved a scorched lattice across my very soul. I only prayed the containment would hold. As I staggered through the rubble, voices clamoring in my skull, the living wolves emerged from the mist. No longer monstrous, but solemn and at peace. The white alpha approached and inclined his head, yellow eyes sorrowful yet grateful. In saving Haven's End from the released darkness, I had broken the curse that enslaved them all. But our reprieve was only temporary. The wolves led me back to the forest cemetery, now bathed in dawn's light. There they circled a freshly dug grave at the plot's heart and gazed upon me with mournful understanding. Here lay my destiny, to be bound eternally as Haven's End's guardian and vessel for the spirits I had liberated and captured. I had no tears left, only a bone-deep weariness. As I climbed into the earth and gazed up at the pale sky for the last time, the wolves' melancholy howls filled the air. They would keep watch over this place and ensure my sleep remained undisturbed. Their penance completed, mine was just beginning. I closed my eyes as dirt rained down, welcoming the solace of oblivion at last. The ghostly calls resonated through the mountains as the wolves voiced their timeless lament. Haven's End rested in darkness, no fires, no phantoms, no lingering souls, an empty void where a thriving village had once stood. The sacrifices had been many, myself among them. Now only the watchful wolves remained, guardians of the secrets buried beneath this hallowed ground. Protectors of the perpetual night and the unseen evils that dwelled below, never to haunt the living again.